The section of the Rhine that flows between Frankfurt and Koblenz is a marvel. The long grey river snakes through the landscape, worthy of a movie decor. It's inspired by its romantic past. Small, freshly painted castles, plots of vines magically suspended above the riverbanks, dizzying vistas, breathtaking light. Every day, travelers navigating on the great river enjoy a life-size picture postcard. But most visitors are far from imagining that the figures on the hillsides, leaning down in the vineyards, are the true artisans of this unique universe. The winemakers of the Rhine Valley are the last to hold the secrets of Riesling, the most famous German grape variety. Hello. Hello? Oh, hi. It's October 10th, and the harvest season has begun on the heights of the medieval village of Bacharach. In Germany, the Riesling grape holds first place, grown on almost 50,000 acres, against just 7,000 acres in France. For Randolph Kauer and his daughter Anne, owning several plots of vineyards in this area is not easy, especially when you have to work a slope steeper than 50 degrees.
It takes us 200 to 250 hours of work per hectare. In a plain with our farming machines, it takes about 3 hours. Nevertheless, this system helps us. Our cable system and our special boxes for harvesting make our job easier. A few years back, we carried it all on our backs. It was much harder. Many winemakers have given up in the Rhine Valley because the work is too strenuous.
I fell into it when I was little. It's really beautiful, don't you think? Grape harvesting here is extraordinary. It's also tiring. You always have to think about what's left to do to avoid going up and down too often. You have to think ahead. Tourists often ask, how can you stand? How does it work? I say you don't learn it, you simply live it. For several years, Anne and her father have been watching the first effects of global warming on their vineyards. The significant increase in temperatures has played in their favor up until now. But today, the long periods of drought endanger the character of the Riesling in the region. I think these past years regarding German wine quality, things are improving all over. Of course, we're seeing the effects of climate change, extreme weather like hail, or very warm years. Last year, for example, the spring was too dry. But that's what's exciting. This is our challenge. And the vines have been here for a long time. They can withstand a lot. After earning her diploma in oenology and viticulture, Anne should soon take over the family vineyard. In addition to viticultural techniques, Randolph also tries to convey the unique history of this terroir, whose soil, composed of slate, brings acidity and a mineral taste to the Riesling.
This slate with a hole demonstrates how the winemaker's work influences the landscape. It's a symbol for the winemaker. Initially, this rock is buried at several centimeters. Then it's struck by the hoe that pierces this little hole. After several years, due to erosion, the slate comes up to the surface. When we find it, we say, "My God, in 1950 or 1960, someone broke through this slate while working." Our family still uses the hoe, and we'll produce, almost unintentionally, pierced stones, and in 20 or 30 years, others will find them.
In the Middle Ages, the wines of Bacharach were famous because from the shores of this small village, thousands of barrels produced in the surrounding areas were shipped all over Europe. But to discover the origins of viticulture in Germany, you have to travel back in time and go upriver about 18 miles against the current to the city of Frankfurt. A little more than 12 miles separate Bacharach and the vineyards of the Rheingau region and its prestigious domains. Just around a bend, the landscape suddenly changes. The mountains flatten to make way for huge expanses of vineyards. The whole story of German wine growing began here on the heights of the Rhine. Since the 12th century, at the edge of a thick forest, an imposing Cistercian abbey lays hidden. Borrowing the methods developed by the Citeaux monks in Burgundy, the monks of Eberbach domesticated a wild vine discovered earlier in the forests of the Upper Rhine. They chose the slopes for their sunshine and revolutionized how the land was worked with the invention of new tools. Twice a year, in the abbey's cellars, Dieter Greiner, the domain's manager, chooses his best bottles for a special auction. One of these treasures of the past is even more valuable because current climatic conditions no longer permit it to be produced. Grapes for ice wine can only be harvested in January or February during harsh winters.
1975, a jubilee year, 40 years old. The vineyard Brauntaler Balken is one of the most precious locations in our domain. This vineyard is for the noblest sweet wines. Here we have an ice wine. It's very unique because today, with the warmer climate, it's almost impossible to make ice wine.
90 Euro, 95, 100, 200, 200.
The Eberbach auction takes place in the Old Monks Refectory. Each year, they attract the country's greatest connoisseurs. Here, the best wines can reach significant amounts, like this bottle dating from 1945.
1600, 50, 1650. There's still suspense. 1700? No one? 1750. 1750 once, 1750 twice, no one, 1750, 3 times, sold.
A man takes advantage of the cloister's deserted paths to sneak into the heart of this great abbey, which served as a natural setting for the Jean-Jacques Annaud film In the Name of the Rose. Michael Appitz grew up in the region. The painter has always been fascinated by the history of viticulture in the Rheingau region. For him, the old wine presses, dating from the 17th century, are all vestiges recalling the genius of the monks.
Vinum delicat et letificat horn hominum. Wine gives pleasure and raises the heart of man. This inscription is the symbol of the entire Rheingau wine region. The Abbey of Eberbach is at the origin of everything. Because the monks researched winemaking, all their work was focused on viticulture. If they hadn't existed, we would probably not have this legacy. We must know the history of Eberbach to understand the civilization of the Rheingau.
Cistercian monks were the source of technical innovations, such as presses and barrels. They also built high walls to protect the vines against wild animals. They didn't just improve the grape varieties, they also banished the presence of trees in the vineyards to increase yields.
I think there are parallels between the architecture of the abbey and the vineyards. Today, the vineyard is planted in very clean, straight lines. It's not clear if this was the case at the time of the monks. We just know that the vine's feet were elevated, not in rows, but on individual poles. What I mean is that the monks had a tendency towards discipline, in their work and in their architecture. I think the vineyard was an invention of this kind. They wanted order in all things.
Nearly 900 years after the monks, this domesticated nature is undergoing increasingly adverse effects due to human activity. The workers of the land are the first to see the deregulation that appears. It's 8 a.m. The lukewarm river waters slowly evaporate into the atmosphere. Randolph has changed out of his work clothes to go to Geisenheim. 5 days a week, Professor Kauer supervises courses in the Graduate School of Viticulture and Oenology.
Over 20 or 25 years, things have changed considerably. Temperatures have risen. Riesling is maturing much earlier. Weather extremes increasing. We cannot predict what will happen in the fall. Days of rain, summer droughts. The challenge now is to see how the vines react and whether this has an impact on wine quality. There are many projects at the university. Students are participating in this research. They have their own vineyards, and they study it throughout the year.
After the Cistercian monks, and later great aristocratic families, today students from around the world benefit from this open-air laboratory to conduct their own experiments with the grapes. When we look closely at the vineyards, we soon realize that the banks of the wide river feature a concentration of very favorable natural elements for viticulture, like the reflection of rays of sunlight and constant humidity. Hans Schlutz is a renowned scientist and director of the University of Geisenheim. With Randolph, they wonder about the real effects of global warming on the vines.
These vineyards are ideal for our research. They're like a huge laboratory. We grow 29 different grape varieties on which we can see the effects of the climate and how the vines react. All this work is done according to the principles of sustainable and organic farming. Thanks to this diversity, we have a wide scope of experimentation. We can work on many species from different grape varieties.
With his teams, Hans Schlutz has put in place a strange installation. On a small plot at the university, a large tank of carbon dioxide, or carbonic gas, experimentally recreates the Earth's atmosphere as it might be in 50 years.
Hear that? Everything becomes louder and faster because the wind speed is accelerating. This allows us to keep a constant concentration of CO2 in this circle. With this installation, we want to understand what will happen in the future in such an ecosystem so we can react better. We simulate here what nature, man and nature, are preparing for us in 2050, 2060. We need time to adapt. We need to know how this ecosystem will respond in 50 years. Adaptation always takes time. It's not only the temperature that's changing, it's the CO2 concentration, the distribution of water. We know nothing about this today.
Not far from the University of Geisenheim is an area just as famous as that of Eberbach Abbey, the Johannisberg Castle, one of the biggest Riesling names in Germany. In the midst of vineyards stands a small monument topped with a symbolic figure. This number, 50, is exactly on a former limit, a sort of border that requires that vines be grown between 30 and 50 degrees northern latitude. Now, the gradual warming of the planet has changed the situation, and today on the European continent, adventurous winemakers are planting grapes in areas near 59 degrees north latitude, like in Helsinki, Finland. A former Geisenheim student, Christian Witte, now manages the operations of Johannesburg. The legacy of this wine-growing region is revealed through the incredibly old wine bottles in this underground cellar. For example, among these shelves we find an extremely rare vintage dating from 1748. Since the 18th century, the castle's owners have kept exceptional archives. These records give accurate information on rising temperatures recorded here since the 18th century.
Viticulture allows a multitude of manipulation. In this area, things are never fixed. It's not like a coral reef. We have a huge range of possibilities. This is why, if you do it on time, a Riesling planted today should adapt to the climate of 2065. These systems will be paramount in 50 years. Vineyards and winemakers are especially sensitive to climate. They know what's happening, they feel the changes. I think they're ready to adapt even more than other types of farmers.
Als vielleicht andere in der Landwirtschaft.
Also man sieht es ja schon allein die Zeit, in der wir
We already see the harvest period is becoming shorter and shorter. We harvest for 2, 3, or 4 weeks maximum. 10 years ago, we had harvests that lasted 7 or 8 weeks. I'm convinced we have the means at our disposal to preserve all this, and we can continue cultivating Riesling here in the Riesling Cathedral for a long time to come.
The wine growers of the Rhine Valley know that it is time to act now, if they don't want to lose the character of their white wine. From now on, they must now depend on new knowledge gained by scientists. They must not only predict the future, but also find a balance between the respect for nature, implementation of new techniques, and profitability of the domains. Today, the history of Riesling and the evolution of the vineyards of the Rhine Valley is not only of interest to specialists and wine lovers. In recent years, thanks to the artistic work of Michael Appitz, the general public can also discover a lesser-known wine heritage. The artist created the character of Karl, a comic hero traveling along the Rhine River and through history.
The most surprising thing with my work on the character Karl is that people are opening places to me that had never been opened before. People say, those two artists make this comic book. They're good for viticulture. Let them in and show them interesting things. I've learned about a long tradition of viticulture in the region, and I'm seeing things that we do not usually notice, even when living here. I began painting several years ago. I'd like to express the landscape through my painting, but also the terroir of the region, the flavor of the wines, the vineyards growing here.
Our artist is expected on the Bacharach side to celebrate the end of the harvest with the Kauer family, whom he has known for years. Thus, Michael Appitz crosses the Rhine, one of the busiest waterways in the world, with a barge every 2 to 3 minutes, incessant traffic of raw materials, and sometimes dangerous cargo. Randolph Kauer has become accustomed to the proximity of these two opposing worlds. This fan of organic farming is always looking for new solutions that could enhance the quality of his wine, despite the drought of recent years.
If we want to continue growing here without an irrigation system for 20 years or more, we'll have to find good ideas. It may be necessary to cover the soil with organic matter, such as wood chips, to improve its structure, and thus prevent the water from evaporating. But we'll also have to be very careful not to overexploit our vineyards. If we want a lot of fruit, it takes a lot of water. And if there is no water, there will be no fruit. Our work in the vineyards must be in harmony with nature. When you live here, and you're one with this region, you carry that flame inside you. We want to produce extraordinary quality. And if it works, then the next generation will surely be interested. Our children must continue this adventure.
Randolph lets the vines grow tall to keep the bunches away from the heat of the ground. He keeps the foliage to maintain coolness. But the winemaker counts on his vineyard's great resilience, which is rather robust. According to him, you must take the time to notice nature's small signs, and especially respect it, so that it can deliver its best one day.
Hello, welcome, good to see you.
Before the meal, which will celebrate the end of the harvest, the artist is asked to sort grapes with the family. With the Kauers, from the vineyards to the winery, everything is done by hand. These bunches were carefully selected at the end of the harvest for developing a sweet Riesling, the famous late harvest. Andreas, Randolph's brother-in-law, arrives with a surprise. The chef has prepared the famous Riesling soup.
Ein guter Riesling.
Thus, each year, the harvest of Bacharach ends like so.
These are great moments, but I know they'll sit for hours here. And I still have work in the cellar. And that's why I must say, see you later, I'm going to work.
The Kauers never run out of projects regarding the safeguard of this unique wine heritage. They intend to work tirelessly to continue writing the great wine history of the Rhine Valley for years to come.
People have been growing grapes here for 1,000 years. See over there? 20 years ago, those were vineyards. Today, they've disappeared. But they're beautiful parcels. We know that the quality of the Riesling growing here is well worth it. I see a promising future for this village. We must continue and perhaps even plant some more vineyards.
Okay. When do we start then?
There's room. We must choose.
Okay.